Hello, Hope Chapel. This is Sam Jones, and I'm here to talk about some of the DNA aspects of life groups this week. Last week, Elliot talked about the general layout of what life groups look like. And that general layout is this. It's icebreaker time, it's discussion time, it's mutual ministry time, and then it's fellowship time. And he talked about that. He talked about how child care works and all that. He talks about where we're going to be meeting. And if you have any more questions about that, you can get in touch with him or Pastor Will or me, and we can answer any questions that you have. Another piece of that is our curriculum, and it's going to be Vertical Church, and we're going to be moving through the Vertical Church workbook by James McDonald. And if you have any questions about that, how we're going to get all those, you can contact Pastor Will or one of us. What I'm going to deal with this week is one of the major pieces of our small group, and it's one of the major pieces for discipleship for Hope Chapel. Our mission statement reads like this, is that we are a church that wants to glorify God through the fulfillment of the Great Commission and making disciples of Jesus Christ. And we believe that, that small groups or life groups is a major vital part in making disciples of Jesus. And it's really hard to be the type of disciple that you need to be unless you're in a small group here at Hope Chapel. And so we want to make sure that everybody at Hope Chapel is in a small group because it's how we disciple people. And one of those major components of our small group and major pieces of discipleship is our mutual ministry time in our life groups. In our life groups, we have a piece called mutual ministry, which is nothing more than accountability, transparency, and transformation. And if you'll remember those three things, that's exactly what mutual ministry is. It is accountability, transparency, which leads to transformation. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I have this room in my house, or this door in my house, that not many people get into. And it's been that way for a while. And when visitors come over, I don't really want people to go into that room. It's actually my pantry. When you go in my pantry, I've got my trash can sitting there, and most of the time with me and my wife and our 5 kids, we accumulate a lot of trash. You know, so sometimes at the bottom or the floor of our pantry, our trash can is like overflowing, and then there's stuff all over the floor. You know, and that's one of the places I really don't want our guests going to when they come into our house. But that's somewhere that if we have guests and they want to throw something away, that's where they have to go. And so I have to open up that little door into our pantry that has that terrible overflowing trash can with all the trash on the floor, because it just gets that way sometimes. We all have one of those places in our house, I think. Hopefully I'm not by myself. But the trueness of the matter is that all of us have those places in our life. When it comes to the sin that we deal with, fears that we may have, a lacking of our love for the Lord that we should have, that we don't. We all have those places in our lives that we really don't want people to see, we really don't want people to dig into. And the bad thing about it is that sometimes we push those things way to the back, and we try to deal with those things on our own. The biblical aspect of accountability and transparency. First off, I want to deal with the unbiblical aspect of it. The cultural aspect of accountability is like this in the South, in Southern churches. It's like you ask somebody, who are you accountable to? And they're like, I'm accountable to God, and I'm not accountable to anybody else. And they're like, I don't need to be accountable to anybody else. I'm accountable to God. And I get what they're saying, but what that breeds is an unhealthy discipleship format. What happens is that it's like this couple or couples that I've known throughout my life that they are like the backbone of the church. Their kids look like they fit the bill of the kids in a Christian home. The wife teaches Sunday school, and the husband is a deacon or whatever he does, and they all show up to church, and they look like they got it all together. And you may ask them, well, who are you accountable to? I'm only accountable to God. But then like 10 years down the road, it's like this ticking time bomb went off, and there's like this big mess in their family. And it comes out the husband's been doing looking at things online, and the wife's got this control problem, and the kids are just all over the place now, and everybody in the church looks at them and is like, what happened? Where did all that come from? Well, what happened was that they had a sin issue that started 10 years before, and they didn't head it off with the past, and now they're having to live their life in reaction to their sin. And so when you deal with this idea, I'm only accountable to God, you're not letting anyone else speak into your life biblically. And the biblical aspect of accountability is this, is that the Bible tells us in Hebrews 10:24 that we need to, and let us consider how to stir up one another into love and to good works. I'm not just only accountable to God, which I am accountable to Him, but here in this life, I have people in my community of faith that I'm supposed to allow to speak into my life and help me to be accountable to the sins and the lusts and the desires that I deal with. And so I have to deal with that, and I have to make sure that I'm using a biblical understanding of what accountability looks like. Galatians 6:2 also says this, is that we're to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. And so if I've got a burden of a lust or a desire that I'm dealing with or a sin that I deal with, it's right and biblical to allow someone to help me bear that burden. And so I don't end up like that staple family of Christian whatever that seems like they've got it all together, and in 10 years it just blows up because they have not been in the place of accountability, and they have not been in the place where they could live proactively according to their sin, to dealing with their sin. And that's something we need to remember. When we're dealing with life groups and dealing with accountability, and transparency is there to help us to live our lives in proaction when we deal with our sin rather than reaction. Because if we proactively preempt things from happening, we proactively fight against the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life, and we fight against that and being proactive, then we're not having to be reactive to fix the problems that come from the actual committing of a sin. And so we want to make sure that in our discipleship process, so we're making sure that people are being accountable, and they're accountable to other people. And so that's the biblical aspect of it. I'm not just only accountable to God, and that's the only thing. I'm also accountable to other people in my community of faith and in my life group. And that's a part of our life groups. That's a big part of discipleship. The second thing is this, is that there's a practical aspect of this. And the practical aspects that we're going to deal with is that we have to make sure that in our mutual ministry time and accountability time, that we create a safe environment for people to talk about the things that they deal with. The Bible says about God, when we come to Him, we ask for wisdom, that He doesn't reproach us. And we have to make sure that we have or He doesn't laugh at us, or He doesn't make fun of us. We have to make sure that in our life group, when we have mutual ministry time, that we have a safe, loving environment so that we can help people deal with the things that they're dealing with in their heart. And so that's the only way it's going to work. And so that we have a confidentiality covenant that we all sign. We have to make sure that when men talk about things in their group, that it doesn't go outside of that group to their wives or to their friends. And when women talk about things in their group, it doesn't go outside of their group to their husbands and their friends. That's the practical aspect of it. Because people are going to be coming into our life groups, and they're going to be talking about things in their mutual ministry time that will shock you. Or they're honestly coming to get help because they need it. Because they don't want to be like so many other people in their marriages, that their marriages fall apart, or whatever it is. And so we need to make sure that we're safe and loving and caring for these people. And the last thing is that there's commonality. We have to understand when it comes to accountability and transparency is that all of us deal with the same thing. The same sins, the same lusts, the same desires. And just because I deal with something that may be different than what you're dealing with, they're both something that if we act upon our lusts and desires, that would be a transgression against the Lord. And so all of us are coming with a commonality of things that we're dealing with, and the commonality of sins and desires and lusts, and those things that we have to fight against. Reminds me of a story of these two men who are in war. Both of them were in a foxhole, and one of them jumps out of the foxhole to go do something, and he gets shot in the line of fire. And so his friend is watching this take place. He gets ready to jump out of the foxhole, and his commanding officer reaches up and pulls him back in and said, "What are you doing? You're going to get killed just like your friend out there." And he said, "But I told him I would never leave him behind." And so when the commanding officer turned his back, this guy jumps out of the foxhole, gets his friend, and in the meantime, making his way back to the foxhole, he gets shot, mortally wounded, and he just falls in the foxhole, and the commanding officer is looking at these two guys who are wounded. They're both getting ready to die. And he asked the one guy, he said, "Was it worth it to go out there and do that? Was it worth it to go out there and get shot and come back and die?" And he said, "Yeah, it was totally worth it, because I promised him I would never leave him behind." And the commanding officer had respect for that. And that's one of the things we have to remember. All of us here at Hope Chapel, all of us are in a war. And when it comes to our small groups and our life groups, and we have our mutual ministry time, we have to understand that us men and the ladies in that group are in a war together. We're both fighting the same battle. We all need to lock arms and not leave anyone behind. And one guy asked me, he said, when we're talking about life groups, and he said, "Isn't that messy? Doesn't that take a lot of time when you're dealing with people's sin and trying to help them work through that, and you're not going to leave them behind, and you're going to rescue them from things that might hurt them?" And it is messy. But discipleship is messy. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort. And our mission statement at Hope Chapel is that we want to glorify God through the fulfillment of the Great Commission and making disciples for Jesus Christ. And so in doing that, we have to make sure that we make a big priority when it comes to accountability, transparency, and transformation in our life groups. Mutual ministry time is where that happens.